Let's take a look at this soliloquy from Macbeth. What you see is the soliloquy from Act 1, Scene 1 of Macbeth on the left. And on the right is a translated version in a more modern English as published by Shakespeare Made Easy. So in line 47, we can see that what Macbeth says here is, "To be thus is nothing." And in Shakespeare Made Easy, we have a translation is, "To be thus a king is nothing." So they limit the word thus to being just about being a king. And I wonder, one thing that you might want to think about here is Macbeth talking about just being a king here? Or is he talking about other things? Are there other things that he wants? Think back to the witch's prophecies regarding Banquo, which are what generated this whole line of thought in the first place. Are there other things that he could want besides being king? Macbeth goes on to say in line 47 and 48 and 49, "Our fears in Banquo stick deep," which is translated in the Shakespeare Made Easy as "I fear Banquo deeply." Now, this is kind of interesting and something I noticed. We have here the word "I," whereas in the Shakespeare original, Macbeth uses the royal "we." And something to think about here is what might be the sort of underpinnings of that word change. The royal "we," you remember, is referring to not just the king himself, but the king and the state, the king and God. If you think back to Divine Right of Kings, he's not alone here. God wills him to be king. He is speaking for the state. So, what happens when we change that "our" to "I"? What are the implications? What do we lose in that translation? Also, another thing to think about, our fears in Banquo, the words stick deep compared to "I fear Banquo deeply." Is there a difference between having your fears stick deep and fearing something deeply? Something to think about as well. Another thing to think about, in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared, is what Shakespeare says. And over here we have, in his regal nature, there's a ruling element to be feared. And I'm wondering, in our translation, regal, is regal the same thing as royalty of nature? Another thing to think about, is it the same thing to say something reigns versus there's a ruling element? What happens with those word changes? Now let's take a look at what he says next. "'Tis much he dares" is translated as he's daring. Daring, that's the action. He's daring, he's doing something. "'Tis much he dares." What does he dare to do? Is it the same thing to say "'tis much he dares"? What does it mean to dare much? Versus what does it mean to be daring? Are they really saying the same thing? So you could go on with this kind of explanation of a text. If you're flipping the classroom, a video of this sort could be posted online and your students could be asked to watch it, and be prepared to discuss the questions you raise in the video during the next class. The benefit would be that they could watch the video many times if necessary, just in case they miss something.